Hello everyone, my name is Priyank Pathak. So today the first agenda today is design thinking for Novice. I'll request Mr. Ramakrishna and Rohit to take over.
Uh, I welcome Ramakrishnan uh, from Tech Mahindra to on the stage.
Hi. Hey, thanks. Thank you, Rohit.
So, uh, so we welcome Ramakrishnan on the stage, our first speaker for the day. So he is currently the group practice head for the consulting in Tech Mahindra. So he is passionate about design thinking, led transformation, and he is a hands-on management consultant with experience in delivering key digital transformation projects for customers, and he has worked with multiple companies, clients, etc., and is very knowledgeable with respect to this topic. So over to you, Ramakrishnan.
Thank you, Rohit. I would like to try and share some of my thoughts around how we do design thinking and how I personally interpret design thinking, and hopefully it'll give you a kickstart to how you might want to interpret it in your workplaces. Now, design thinking is a very simplistic concept at the very base level, and it actually has a very detailed set of approaches to make it work. And typically, you deliver the value of understanding how design thinking is done in a more elaborate, maybe a 2-day workshop. But in this half an hour, I'm just trying to go and cover the essence of what design thinking is and demonstrate through some example and demystify the fact that it's not really theory, it's actually even practice. So show you one example of how practically it can be used even in the services industry, because people tend to have a challenge in relating to how design thinking makes sense from using it in a product company versus a services company. Yeah. If you have any questions, you would be able to chat, and I'm not sure if you'd be able to talk, but you could certainly put your questions in the chat window, and Rohit shall help me ensure that we cover that. Great. Thanks, everybody. I'll start with explaining to you what we'll cover today. I've shared my presentation here. So basically, only two topics. Why design thinking, and what's the value in design thinking? And how do we then transition from understanding it as a theory to practicing it in real world? And does it actually work in the real world? Those are the only two things we try to do. I'll play a video. I'd like you to look at it and tell me what you infer from it. And it'll be interactive. So feel free to type your comments. That makes it more enriching. I personally lead design thinking as a practice within Tech Mahindra, and I am a group practice head in consulting. We focus on digital transformation consulting, and design thinking is one of our key tools to ensure that we get the transformation planning and the strategy and the execution right from planning strategy to the execution. And we've used it in a diverse set of industries and diverse set of IT asks, from technology transformation goals, from how do you implement SAP S4HANA, and what kind of user pains would you have to address beyond just the technology, to even levels of actual redesign of apps or services, or delivering the entire operating model for a particular opportunity. I'll show you one example as we go ahead. And we will start with this slide, right? This is one of my favorite slides to encapsulate the essence of design thinking. Now, my question to you is, what do you get? What is your takeaway when you look at this slide? And how many of these are digitally touched up images which aren't really natural? These are my two questions to you. What do you get by looking at the slide? What is your inference? Second, how many of these are unnatural and digitally modified? If you can point out or call out these specific ones, that'll be good. In the interest of time, I'll probably just give it a minute for people to go over this and make their mind up. And if there are any pings in the chat window, do let me know, Rohit, because I'm on screen
Okay.
slideshow and I'm not able to see that.
Yes. Rakesh Chandra Goyalji has written it different looks. Priyank
Okay.
Pathak has written all are digital. Rama
Okay.
has written different shapes of beaks.
Okay.
Uh, EBMS Syed Ibrahim has written multiple designs for multiple needs.
Beautiful.
Vivekanandan Ramaswamy has written third done in top.
Okay. Okay. Good.
Right.
Thanks.
So yeah, there are a few more digital images. Topics is biomimicry, different requirements, different designs. Second and last are digitally redefined.
Okay. Fine. I'll
Right.
Thanks. In the interest of time, I'll go ahead. Thanks for all of your comments, and thanks everybody for putting your notes in. It's a great thing to know that a lot of people are actually actively sitting and looking at the screen, not just listening in pastime. So I do more justice to what I'm doing. Thank you. All of these are actually natural birds with the most among the most unique beaks in the world. And none of them are digitally touched up. Although all of them look quirky, out of place, unnatural, just cannot be, right? All of them look weird. If you were to play God and you had the chance to design a beak and there was, you had a task, go draw a beak for me, I'd probably draw a beak of a crow or a sparrow, right? I perhaps wouldn't even do something as weird as this. This kind of a this middle one at the top is a shoebill, right? This one is a crossbeak or crossbill. It actually has a beak which is twisted, intertwined, or so to say, right? You would actually wonder how can any bird use a beak like this to even hold a grape or hold a fruit or anything. This one on the bottom seems to have a lower mandible, which is longer than the one on top. And you think it's probably broken it off in a fight. But no, that's an American skimmer, which has a beak that way because it flies over water and snaps shut when it finds a item in between. This one is a swordbill hummingbird, one of the 300 species, which has the longest beak for its body and longer than the entire length of the body. And it can only sit with its beak tilted up for center of gravity purposes. But it has a purpose, and it lives and has access to a particular variety of flower which no other bird in its environment can access because it needs a beak of that nature to get to that. This crossbill has a beak that's twisted, and you'd probably think it's a deformity, but that design exists because it has access to pine cones, and it can pry open the pine cones to get to the nuts within, which a bird with any other type of beak will not be able to do. Right? So all of these, the net message is all of these are designed for purpose. They are items which are required, which are serving a specific purpose of that particular bird. Now, if somebody came up with a design like this to you, at first look, you might say, what rubbish? Are you a novice? Are you doing this for the first time? Haven't you understood? How can this even work, right? That's going to be my natural instinct as well, to throw it away. But only when you spend time understanding the context of the user, the environment it has to live in, the competition that it has to deal with, the other actors or stakeholders in the ecosystem, in our parlance, only when you understand the kind of activity that it's wanting to achieve, will you even put pen to paper to come up with a design like this, which in the first place we would never even think of. That is the essence of design thinking. It helps you go and understand the true needs and the true problems to solve before you start designing something which in the original place you might have thought is absurd and just can't be. That's the value of design thinking. Now, because you do this approach of design thinking and you're able to empathize with your stakeholders truly, you were able to get these values out of design thinking as a methodology. You get to the real root of the issue and identify the real problem before you start taking efforts to designing a solution. Therefore, your stakeholder alignment becomes very good because you've engaged with all the stakeholders and you've not just considered the one person whom you think is the biggest user for what you're building. Second, the return on investment of the projects are high because you've spent enough time to really understand the problems. Because a lot of times, what people say, what people do, what people feel, and what people think are four different things. Say, do, feel, think are four different things. Sometimes it's a Stockholm syndrome. You live with the problem. You don't even realize that you could have a solution out of this, and there's a better way of doing it. And therefore, unless you put enough efforts to figure out what the real problem is, you'll have projects that go live which pass all test cases, but eventually user adoption is low and you don't get the desired outcome that you originally had. And then you backtrack and realize that you have a lot of change requests that need to be done to plug gaps in what you've designed and delivered, and that becomes a huge impact on ROI. You've put money behind a project, you find user adoption is poor, you have to spend more money to plug the gaps, and then you realize that you probably got it wrong in the first place. It also helps you manage change better because you have engaged with all the stakeholders up front. It minimizes risk because you do backtracking lesser in such a situation because you've spent enough time to understand before you start scripting. It helps you improve efficiency and customer experience in totality because when you do an exercise of this nature, it's like a master health checkup rather than going for a pop a pill and you hope for the problem to go away. And when you do a master health checkup, you realize that your body posture is bad, your food habits are bad, and a lot of other things need to change. And you get a holistic um, um, insight into what needs to change to get your objective achieved. And at the end of the day, and I'm talking from an IT perspective, a lot of what happens in the success of a program is not only just dependent on what IT does, but in terms of all the other enablements, process enablements, the empowerment, the communication, training, change management, all of which needs to go in together to make the change effective and lasting. So that's the real value that you get from design thinking. And Tim Brown, who is the CEO of IDEO, and whose IDEO is an organization that's synonymous with design thinking. And whenever you have time, you can look up the shopping cart example on YouTube. It's a brilliant example of how design thinking started. And he says it's a human-centered approach to innovation that draws from the designer's toolkit to integrate the needs of people. Please note he starts with people. So therefore, empathy, human-centric design or design thinking is synonymous with people. They integrate the needs of the people, the possibilities of technology, and the requirements of business. So in other sense, desirability, viability, and feasibility, starting with desirability. And the intersection of those triad of circles is where you get the maximum success for your project. And having said that, I'd like to play a video for you next. Here, I'd probably get out of my screen share and I'll pull my headset off and I will play the YouTube video. What I'd like you to do when you listen to the YouTube video is tell me what's your takeaway. I'd like you to tell me what you think is a problem that's being solved and what do you think is a final solution, right? I will stop the video at around 30 seconds and I'd let you put your comments. I'll plug my headset off because I think the audio works better only that way. And two questions. What do you think is the problem, the real problem that's being solved? And what do you think is therefore the solution they would have come to at the end of this, right? This is a setting in rural Maharashtra. It's about how NGO has worked with students in a rural school and tried to understand the problems that they're going through and come up with solutions to help the children there, right? That's the context of this. Let's see if you are able to hear it. Okay. Any comments? What do you think is the problem that they're solving here?
So we have got one comment from Saurav.
Yes, posture of sitting, poor eyesight, back problem. Okay, sitting posture. Okay, better infrastructure. Okay, so we're going into solution now. Better infrastructure, right? Make studying easy and comfortable. Okay. Okay, ergonomic problem, right? So you'd be surprised, so what do you think would have been the final solution? What do you think would have been the final solution at the end of the day? Lack of basic needs in school. Children need to enjoy school. Basic desk and chairs for students. Desks and chairs. Okay, right. That's perhaps the best thing to do because you probably go chop a couple of trees, get a carpenter to shave the wood properly into a desk and a chair, or get an industrialist to donate money, and you probably just take that forward from there, from an infrastructure. Or you might say, I need to have liveliness in classroom, paint the walls. Maybe the teachers need to do better. Maybe they need to be trained to teach better. Maybe they need audiovisual aids. Maybe they need a digital medium to teach. Maybe the students need to have better nutrition, maybe better food. So if you look at you might have understood it to be, you probably have less attendance. Pass percentage is poor, dropout is high, attention is poor, the success of children after the schooling is bad, or people, you don't come to school regularly. There could be many symptoms which could have led to an interpretation. But it's interesting to see how they went about creating a solution, make high cement platforms, use it as a desk. Brilliant. Now see what they've gone ahead and done, right? It's interesting, and thanks for your comments. This was an eye-opener for me too. Go ahead. Right. So that was what the what it finally turned out to, right? It turned out to be something that was aimed cheerful and comfortable for the children. It was something about giving them the fun of doing assembly, like watching, playing with your Lego toys, right? Your design principles were economical, ecological, sustainable, etc. Right? Your problems were bad posture. But then if it's only infrastructure bad posture, you're right. Maybe a cement bench or something is better, or seating arrangement against the walls is better, right? But they realize that it's also about the fun element because you're talking of a demographic of children. And therefore, they wanted to make it fun, and this seemed to be a sustainable way to do it. Now, if you hadn't spent time sitting in the midst of children, talking to all the stakeholders concerned, understanding what children really want from that perspective, you probably would have jumped the gun and provided a solution which is different. It might have had some benefits, but it may not have had the kind of benefits of fun that this solution provides. So one key takeaway is when we define the problem we want to solve, rather than using a noun form, we need to word it in a verb form. That makes it more comprehensive, right? The moment you introduce a verb into the way you define a problem, it becomes more complete as a solution because it opens up many more opportunities for you to ideate. I'll just go back to my presentation and show you some tangible elements of how we do it. So, this is a standard design thinking framework all of you would be familiar with: empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. And the most important part of the entire process is the empathy bit, because unless you get this right, you probably define the wrong problem, ideate for the wrong problem, test the wrong problem, and realize the program is a failure. And therefore, empathize becomes most important. And now this is a barrelfish which has a transparent head, probably the only species in the world you can look into its head and see what's going on, a deep sea creature. But for humans, that's not possible. And therefore, you have the design thinking framework and methodologies on how you do empathy and how do you do research, how do you do problem definition. It's a proper scientific approach, which we'll not be able to cover in a 1 hour session, would need more than that. But I'm just giving you a teaser to that. Now, what this means is, how do you implement something like this, right? A concept like empathize and translate using all the methodologies to actual giving outcomes, right? So we did this. We've done many projects using design thinking in Tech Mahindra. So one of the main areas we use it for is in planning what needs to be done, understanding the real problems before you can script a solution across any transformation initiative. So we worked with a large global pharma major who was doing a patient support program for breast cancer patients in India. And they wanted to understand, why is it that people look at the patient support program only as a methodology to get some bit of free drugs, right? Can we make more meaningful impact to the lives of patients? So we did a design thinking based exercise. And you would assume that the largest, the main stakeholder in the patient support program for a breast cancer patient is the patient themselves. But then it's very difficult just to empathize directly with the patient and ask some questions, and it probably gives you only one perspective. So one of the main things we did was we spoke to a whole spectrum of people involved in the entire patient support program. We spoke to caregivers, doctors, nurses, lab technicians, pharmacists, patient support organizations, and went with a clean slate and tried to craft a patient journey, which is like what you see. We drafted the as-is patient journey. And the way you draft the journey is not just by trying to plot something with a questionnaire, but there is a scientific approach of structuring questions, having leading questions, open-ended questions, planning the research before you actually do the research and all of that stuff. So the other thing we did was we realized that when we talked to them, what we thought was the biggest asset of the program, which is where you get for every 5th chemo, you get the 6th chemo free or something like that, right? Different ratios, it works for different brands. Which we thought was the biggest asset of the program, was one of the biggest impediments as well, because it introduced a lot of inconvenience to the patient, because that drug was being sent to their residence, and a person in their physical incapacity will have to receive it, open the door, get it from the courier guy, keep it in the fridge, make space. It's a huge box under which one small set of drugs are there, which are well preserved with ice packs, etc. So it busts myths that tells you that you probably don't have a strong point in what you think is a strong point. People are just tolerating it, but they wish there was a different way to make it work. And therefore, it spun a whole line of thought on how do we make it easy for people, even though we give them free drugs, how do we make it easy in terms of its dissemination and consumption? Second, we realized that while they say, I don't want to talk, they actually want to say, I want to listen, right? And therefore, we realized that it's important to build an ecosystem wherein we are able to get them together to share stories of success and have a periodicity in which how you communicate with them. Some people are okay with WhatsApp, some people require emails, some people require physical posts, some people require the patient support person to go and visit them once every month, because it gives them reassurance that they are being taken care of and they can share things one-to-one. We realized that for the drug itself to be effective, the mental state of the patient is important. And they have a lot of questions on where do I go for prosthetics? What kind of exercise should I do after my surgery? I've forgotten. I remembered right after the surgery, but then I've forgotten. Can I get a physiotherapist to come and visit me often? So there are a lot of enablements in the program, which were a process-related intervention, which we didn't think were needed before. Second, people seem to say, I don't want to talk to you, but they really want to listen to you. So how do you create a digital medium by which you're able to share some of these success stories? That was the second takeaway. The third was we realized that some of our procedural challenges, which we need to be compliant to because these drugs are very expensive, to ensure that we're giving a free drug to the legitimate person, actually poses more hardships in the people than what we think it is. So therefore, that became another area that we needed to focus on. Reduce the procedural dependencies, try to digitize more of it, try to make it easy, etc. So doing a more conscious research gives you better empathy. Better empathy gives you better understanding of where the patient journey lies, where it dips. Using that insight, you're able to identify where the patient journey needs to peak up in the 2D journey map. And that delta gives you the product backlog. And the product backlog is not necessarily an IT codable product backlog, but anything that needs to be done to make the mission itself a success. And this was done in a very collaborative way. We involved a doctor, we involved caregivers, NGOs, Lions Club kind of firms, all of them as well. So we got all of these people together to get to this kind of an insight. And what it gave was it busted myths and it gave you a roadmap for success, which went beyond your core purpose of giving free drugs, but helped you achieve the objective of making meaningful impact and improving the quality of life of the patients. And we've done this across many more tangible IT service related areas, but this is one demonstration. Go sit outside a radiation room, wait outside, go and talk to somebody when they're undergoing chemo, keep them engaged, visit them at their home, all that kind of stuff is what we did. And that's something that's essential if you want to get your feet really in their shoes, right? We're already out of time. I'd probably just close with this slide and take 5 minutes of questions. So one of the 6 critical factors that we believe are essential when we do a workshop of this nature or we do a design thinking exercise, it's collaborative. People come together, work together, brainstorm together, crib together, and solve together. It's important to make it fun. Otherwise, it can get very emotionally draining because it's
just about intense 2-3 years of conversations and scripting and prototyping and designing the solution, right? It's important to prototype and experiment, because only when you mix and merge multiple ideas and actually put pen to paper in visualizing what you have in mind will you be able to get the right solution. And it's important to challenge convention, because otherwise, like a salmon, we'd never go upstream. We'd only go with the flow, and we'd probably come up with the same kind of solutions, which doesn't give birth to new ideas, right? And it's important to look beyond the obvious, because both risk and opportunity lies hidden in the obvious in front of us. Unless you clear the clutter, you wouldn't be able to see what's there right in front of you. And it's important to involve all and observe and listen. So these are some of the mantras of making design thinking successful. Fascinating area with very tangible impact, both in life and in work. And I'd urge all of you to try it out if you haven't already. So that brings me to the close of what I wanted to say. I could probably take any questions now for the next maybe 5 minutes. I hope that made sense to people.
All right. So that was indeed a great metaphor-based design thinking presentation from Ramakrishnan. So we have 2 questions. The first question is from Srijit. How do we bring design thinking in ways of working change initiative?
Okay. It's a little bit unclear to me when you say ways of working. What exactly do you mean? But I think, okay, we did a project for a large trucking company that wanted to quadruple its brokerage business, right? And we realized that today what they are doing is a manual process, and every time they somebody books a 100K order, they actually walk down to the floor and ring a bell, and that announces saying, "Hey, I've clocked a milestone," and it spurs people on in a competitive environment. We realized that when you're actually changing the ways of people's working, and you have to digitize the entire process, because if the company wanted to scale their business 4x times, it's not going to be able to do it with this limited team, limited infrastructure, and limited space in one area that they sit. It's going to be dispersed, it's going to be digital, it's going to be faster. So we realize that it's important to pay attention to some of these critical operational aspects which do not get set aside, because those are what we call bright spots in the context of a design thinking exercise. And we need to find a way to digitally ring the bell, so to say. Maybe a pop-up in everybody's desk in the system, maybe an alert that goes out. So it's important when you do a people change initiative to look at what's good and strong and bright, which shouldn't be disrupted, and what's important to change, and how do you involve people in making that change possible. And that's where stakeholder alignment and change management becomes easy, because there are different reasons why people want to or not want to do anything. And scripting that in the way you plan your execution eventually is what is important. It's not just about understanding what needs to change, but about how people might resist the change. So change management becomes an important element to plug in.
All right. That's amazing answer. So we have a second question from Naresh. How design thinking is different from various agile frameworks? All frameworks provide the same kind of advantages what design thinking is providing.
Okay. I think only one of the main things that it brings in is in the empathy bit, right? Otherwise, if you look at it, how did you invent the wheel, right? Somebody, Dimag ki batti jala de, that ad that people might remember, Mentos, right? Somebody just realized, hey, if this was round, it makes it easy for me to go past. So therefore, they shaved the round shape, and that became a wheel, right? So problem solving has always been about trying to understand your market, understand the problem, and try to give a solution that gives you profitable outcomes at the end of the day. That hasn't changed. So if you're able to do that, it is obvious that you've understood somewhere empathetically what your stakeholder group really requires. So the difference between agile and design thinking, the way we gel the two together, is design thinking works up front. It comes up with a high-level product backlog. It looks at the entire scheme of things that need to change, the codable, uncodable, executable process, all of those elements. And then at every sprint level, you take it and build into a sprint backlog with a subset of those product backlog, the high-level product backlog that design thinking exercise gives you. And then you build that MVP from each of those. The time to do the empathy, the time to engage your stakeholders, feet on the ground, feel their aches and pains and niggles and sprains is not going to happen in a short, crunched agile sprint of 4 weeks. It requires more engaged conversation, more foot in the ground, feet, go visit the market, etc. And therefore, I would look at this as a precursor to an agile series of sprints. But the main difference is it probably spends more time in empathy than in actually coming up with ideation. That's the core difference. And the way you run the empathy, that's the make or break of it. How many different stakeholders you actually involve? How do you involve them?
All right. We thank you, Ramakrishnan, for providing your great insights and case study of on the design thinking. And
Yeah.
yeah,